Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. For the past few years, we've been constantly living on pins and needles. It seems like since the beginning of this decade, anything that you could imagine happening short of a full-on global collapse has happened. And with all the craziness going on, it can start to feel like we're just one step away from everything falling apart. So today we're going to talk about things to keep an eye out for that, if they were to happen, could mean that we're about to reach a point of no return. And one of the biggest indications that we're about to go from bad to worse will be a significant increase in cyber attacks. Nearly every aspect of modern life relies on network systems to operate, so very little will be immune. These attacks will cause mass confusion and destabilization and impair a nation's ability to keep itself running. All of our utilities, including power plants, water treatment facilities, and natural gas, rely on computer systems that could become compromised. However, if a foreign power were to launch a successful attack on just our power grid, all the others would fall like dominoes. Here in Texas, we witnessed that firsthand during the 2021 Texas ice storm. When ERCOT shut down large portions of our grid to save it, it wasn't just houses and restaurants that were affected. Water treatment and other important facilities went offline as well. And if we were to experience a massive cyber attack on our power grid, the same thing would happen on an even larger scale. And what's so dangerous about this is that cyber attacks can do a whole lot more than just turn stuff off. Code can be written in such a way that it would cause equipment to overload or damage itself, which would mean that after the computer side of things is taken care of, then physical repairs will need to be made on that infrastructure, and that'll take time. Another thing that's vulnerable to cyber attacks is our logistics infrastructure, and that includes everything from the systems that keep ports and warehouses running all the way to navigation systems on ships and planes. And if those were to go offline, both the economy as a whole and our lives as individuals would be affected. Very little of what we consume on a daily basis originates locally, so if the trucks stop running, then so does our supply of food, fuel, and other important goods. Industries will also be affected since they won't be able to get components or raw materials. Then the government itself would be a priority target for anyone wanting to harm our country. Even as recent as last year, numerous government agencies were affected by one cyber attack. And it's very likely that during the opening stages of a global conflict, those would increase dramatically. And since our military relies so heavily on interconnected systems, they would be a big target as well. Another big sign that we've hit a point of no return would be a run on banks. When people start to realize that something serious is happening, they'll do everything that they can to ensure they have at least some of their cash. When this starts to happen, it's very likely that banks will start to put greater limits on withdrawals and may freeze them entirely. And if the economic situation becomes that dire, then mass withdrawals will only be one part of it. In an attempt to limit damage to the economy, stock market trading will be halted to prevent a total crash. In addition, fund transfers to offshore accounts will probably be shut down as well in an attempt to keep as much money at home as possible. One easy way to protect yourself from this is to already have at least some cash on hand. Now, how much you should have is up for debate, but around $500 would probably be a good starting point, and preferably this would be in small denominations to avoid overpaying for things. But then aside from cash, you may also want to have some smaller items around your house that you could use for barter if you find yourself in a situation where maybe you realize you need something that you didn't think of before. You could trade small items to get those things. But cash isn't the only thing people will be desperate for during a crisis. We all remember the great toilet paper debacle of 2020, where grocery stores and big box stores devolved into MMA-style cage matches. And there's really no reason to think that that wouldn't happen again if people got scared or desperate. And while local threats like incoming hurricanes and blizzards can cause this behavior, definitely take notice as stores are getting crazy and there's no obvious reason why. Maybe you get off work and you go to the grocery store, you haven't had a chance to take a look at the news, and then you noticed everybody is like buying up everything that they can find. I know me personally, if I think that maybe a store is a little bit more active than maybe it should be, one of the first things I do is just take out my phone and make sure that there's not some big horrific thing happening that somehow I missed. Food, water, and of course toilet paper will be on the top of most people's lists, but one thing that a lot of people overlook is fuel. That includes gasoline and diesel, along with other things like propane, and propane is actually my favorite fuel to stockpile since it's very stable, lasts basically forever and can run a lot of different things, including my generator, camp stoves, and space heater. So, like with cash, the best way to prepare for these kinds of situations is to have what you need stored ahead of time. And I've done several videos showing different things preppers may want to stockpile, and I'll be sure to put a card for one of those at the end of this video, but you also want to have the ability to procure additional food and water as time progresses. Gardening can give you a long-term supply of fruits and vegetables, while raising animals, hunting, fishing, and trapping can do that for meat. Then for water, a rainwater harvesting system and a good quality filter will help ensure that you have a stable supply of that. Then another sign that we're about to reach a point of no return is that governments will take steps to protect their leadership. For example, in the United States, the president, his cabinet, high-ranking members of Congress, the Supreme Court, and then also folks who are head over agencies like the FBI and CIA will be taken to secure locations that are far away from main target areas. And while the government probably won't announce that these people are being relocated, there will be clues. First, you may hear on the news that they don't know the current location of the president or other high-ranking government officials. These people may also cancel interviews or other public appearances that were pre-scheduled, and this would likely go beyond just politicians. Prominent business leaders, especially those who are involved in strategically important industries like aerospace or energy, will likely do the same thing since their companies have strategic importance. One of the most obvious and concerning instances of this would be if a particular leader was speaking at like a press conference and then they were rushed off stage suddenly, and then you get on the news and then there's also panic, people fleeing the White House or other places like the Capitol. That would probably mean that things are getting pretty serious. And even though these people aren't necessarily national leaders, if a major conflict was about to break out, diplomats would likely be called back from nations we'll soon be at war with, and the embassies in those countries would be closed. Diplomats from those other countries would likely be recalled or expelled from our country as well. But before that happens, it's very likely that there would be a travel advisory issued for those particular countries. Like right now, the State Department has an advisory about Russia that all American citizens residing or traveling in Russia should get out. Now, right now, that's mainly due to a fear of detention. They're afraid that Americans would be used as political pawns since, we're all mad at each other. But if things continue to go downhill, it's very likely that that language on that advisory would get even stronger than it is now. Another sign that we're about to reach a point of no return is an increase in military readiness. And one of the easiest ways to keep track of this is the U.S.'s DEFCON, or Defense Readiness Condition level. Right now, it's believed that we're at DEFCON 3, which is a heightened state of readiness. And if we were to go to DEFCON 2, that would probably mean that an attack is imminent. And then at DEFCON 1, which supposedly we have never been at least as far as the public is aware, in JR terms, that roughly means nuke's gonna drop. So right now, we're already at a heightened state of readiness due to conflicts going on in different parts of the world. And if we went to DEFCON 2, that would put us at the same level of readiness that we were at during the Cuban Missile Crisis and then also the Persian Gulf War. And in addition to looking at our DEFCON level, also pay attention to the military readiness of other nations, including both our allies and potential enemies. And aside from lowering the DEFCON level, there are other actions that our military could take that would indicate that we may be reaching a point of no return. The National Guard could be activated to increase the amount of available personnel, and then personnel on leave could be called back. But probably one of the most concerning signs would be if a whole lot of military assets were moved suddenly away from their home bases. And while we frequently send things like aircraft and naval vessels to different parts of the world for various reasons, this would look very different. For example, if you live near an Air Force base that houses strategic bombers and you notice all of them are starting to take off, that could mean that something very bad is underway, because if there is an imminent attack, then the military is going to move, especially their strategic assets, away from their home bases so that they'll at least survive a first strike. We should also take note if the military suddenly no longer allows the media to access places that it once was able to, because this could mean that sensitive operations are underway. And another event that would be a great reason for concern would be the detonation of a tactical nuclear warhead in combat. Because if this were to happen, there's very little chance that there wouldn't be some response either from the country that got hit or its allies, and that response would probably be nuclear, or at the very least result in an attack on the offending country's nuclear weapons. And either one of those could easily spiral into a situation where multiple nukes are exchanged and could easily devolve into full-on nuclear war. So I don't care how small the first one is, if one drops, I'm not going to be anywhere near a major city or a military base. Another sign that things are about to get much worse is simultaneous shortages of critical items. These can include medical supplies that be necessary to treat mass casualty events, along with personal protective equipment like gloves, hazmat suits, and gas masks. Ammunition would be even harder to find than it is normally, and then you may even have a hard time ordering long-term storage food, since some of those companies like Mountain House produce some food for the military, or the government may scoop them up to be placed in shelters. If those shortages happen roughly at the same time and coincide with global tensions getting even worse than they are now, then it could mean that your government is preparing for a large-scale conflict and is trying to secure as many of those supplies as they can. Another sign that we may have reached a point of no return is the nationalization of communication networks, the most obvious of which being television and radio. We're all familiar with the weekly tests and alerts that are put out by state and local agencies for things like weather events, but that same system can also be used on a national level as well. The main purpose of it is for the president to be able to address the nation from anywhere within 10 minutes of some sort of crisis. It's never been used before other than for tests, so you know if it is used, then that situation is unprecedented and is a major cause for concern. Then, as we all learned a few months ago, the US government also has the ability to send out mass messages to our individual cell phones. Like with radio and television, these are mainly used for more local things like Amber Alerts and tornado warnings, but it could be used for the same purpose as the television and radio warnings as well. Then probably the biggest indication that we've hit a worst case scenario is if everything stops working. If you're at home or at the office and the power goes out, that's probably not a big deal, but if that happens and you notice that your cell phone doesn't want to work or your car has a hard time starting, when all of those happen together, then there's a very good chance that we've just experienced an EMP. And while a high-altitude EMP won't directly harm most people, with the possible exception of folks with things like pacemakers, it will very likely mean that we're at war with a near-peer adversary, which would mean World War III. An EMP would probably be used right before nuclear ground strikes in order to impede a country's ability to respond to them, which in turn would maximize the amount of damage and destabilization that they cause. But if you want to learn more about the preps you need to survive an EMP, then click here, or if you want to learn how to build a Faraday cage, then check out this video. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.